Hey, I'm John Dervage with Our Revolution Colorado Springs. With me today is Susan Crutchfield, who's running for House District 20. Can you start off by explaining a little bit about your platform and why you're running?
Yeah, so my platform focuses on mental health, environmental health, education, and not just K through 12, which a lot of people talk about, but I also am very passionate about preschool. Early childhood education is an investment in the society with a proven return, and better job prospects, not needing government services, not going to jail, not getting addicted to drugs, that sort of thing. It's building the child up from the very beginning for success, and I really like the idea of that. And also higher education, because I think anybody who can earn a diploma should have the ability to carry through their education for as long as they can, so that we have more professionals in the society. And again, it's the same investment. And then also, I would really like to focus a lot on criminal justice reform, because we are throwing away a lot of money, a lot of people into the prison systems, and that has to stop. It's not helpful, it's expensive, it's traumatic, it's inhumane at times. So that's going to be a big part of my platform. And then finally, I want to address homelessness. Especially here in the Springs, I'd look to clean up Fountain Creek, start a Housing First initiative, get those people in a house first so that they can go from there to get a job, to get more self-sufficient and be productive members of society, and to get the mental health care that a lot of them need.
Awesome, yeah. So starting with, let's look at the first aspect of that. So education. What's your position on what we can do in Colorado to improve our education system?
Well, I think it all boils down to the funding, and not only how much funding, but where the funding gets spent. So I would like to raise the salaries of teachers. I would like to find a way to make class sizes smaller. And I would have to take a really comprehensive look at the budget to see, where we can move money around. But I like to think of myself as an efficient problem solver, and to put the money where it's needed most first, and to also put the money where it's going to be an investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think is this area, like, as far as you know, does it have like a shortage of teachers, or is like the pay for teachers in this area like less than national average? Do you know?
It's not less than national average that I know, but I do know that teachers as a whole, even on the national average, are underpaid.
Yeah.
So I would definitely have to take a look at the exact numbers for the Springs and for the state to give a better answer on that.
Yeah, and it seems like, just our like local like public school system, there's a lot of areas for improvement. And you mentioned like growing class sizes. Why do you think that is, potentially occurring? I mean, I know that's happening at the national level, but it seems like that's, definitely occurring also at this, the local level.
Yeah, well, I think that with Colorado Springs and Colorado in general, we have a lot of growth. We have a lot of people coming in, and we do have a lot of schools, but it seems like our infrastructure as a whole, it needs to expand. And so that, of course, includes school. And then I also think that we need maybe some classroom helpers or extra guidance counselors, something like that. Something, especially for elementary and middle school, the smaller kids can get very emotional. They can have a hard time with following all of the rules of school. And I think it's really important to not just focus on the academics and, push for the standardized testing, but I think it's important that the children feel safe and they feel like school is an environment where they can grow and flourish, and not one where they are constantly being told to sit down and shut up and do well on the test.
Yeah, especially like teaching to the test. That was always like a big driver in, middle school and high school for myself that I witnessed, was like a lot of times they were just trying to basically make sure that we'd pass these standardized tests. And like when I got to college, there was a lot of things I felt like I was unprepared for. Yeah. I think another big, you mentioned like starting, school and teaching kids at an earlier age, or at least trying to support them at an earlier age. What exactly do you mean by that? Like, as far as like, at the before kindergarten level?
Well, kind of like the Head Start program, and just daycare, even preschool. I know that Colorado Springs at least has a very limited preschool offering through the district. I think it's half days, and you have to pay few $100s a month. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. So I just want to make that more accessible for everyone, because a lot of times children are in a situation where they may not be getting what they need at home in their communities. And if you can put them in a more supportive and healthier space at an earlier age, then they have a better chance to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like plenty of studies that basically show that, like, you know, the very early stages of development are critical.
Yeah.
So, you know, and there's been mentions too about, like, you know, basically having sort of like a system in place that will help pay for daycare, because daycare is getting more and more expensive. A lot of families can't afford it.
More than a college education at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have experienced that myself.
Yeah, and there seems to be, like, you know, sort of discrepancy between certain, like, types of daycare as
yes, well, yeah, you can get an in-home daycare, you know, if you find somebody on Facebook who has, you know, a child care license, and that can run you maybe $150 a week if you're lucky. I know that the centers, like the daycare centers, like, what is it, KinderCare or something like that, is about $300 a week, which is a lot. You know, if you're making $10 an hour and you work full time and your daycare is $300, that's almost all of your paycheck.
Yeah. So, like, at the state level, like, how can you necessarily, like, you basically can try to pass laws that try to make that, add some more, like, you know, sort of regulation or some standardization on the way, or like maybe help families be able to afford it? Like, what can happen at the state level to make that, like...
Yeah, I think that we can find a way to make it more affordable and more accessible. I don't know how profitable these daycare centers are, or if they're able to cut costs or anything like that. Again, that's something that I would have to delve into pretty deep if I were to start, you know, writing policy on it. But I think it can be done.
Yeah.
And I think I could figure out how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then last thing too, so you mentioned, you know, safety in schools as well. Just diving back into that. So obviously, like, there's a lot of very traumatic, very horrible events that have taken place in the last couple of decades involving, you know, school shootings and things like that. And specifically in Colorado too, like, we've seen our fair share of this for sure.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, so, like, what, in your opinion, can be done to help, or like what kind of, like, things can we do to, like, help mitigate that?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, from an education standpoint, we need more guidance counselors, and we need an emotional curriculum starting from an early age, so that these kids know how to deal with their feelings, and so that maybe we can stop some of the bullying that does take place. You know, just have somebody there to talk about feelings. We all have them.
Yeah.
You know, and it can't just be about learning to read in kindergarten. We have to talk about, you know, learning to follow the rules, learning to get along with each other, learning what to do when we feel like someone's being mean to us.
Yeah.
So from a social emotional standpoint, I would just want more guidance counselors in schools. I know a lot of schools share a guidance counselor, or they're not available in their office all the time. I would like it to be at the point where if a child is having trouble in a classroom, they can go right to that guidance counselor and they can say, look, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
I need somebody to talk and walk me through this. And then secondly, I would like to propose a lockup law for guns, so that children don't have access to the guns. Because that is one huge issue, is that there is such a climate of fear. I mean, the teachers are scared, the students are scared, and it's because we know that, you know, any day somebody could, you know, take a gun from their parents' house and come into school with it.
Yeah.
And, you know, Colorado Springs, sorry, I'm from Chattanooga, so
that's fine.
Colorado Springs Police Department said that there are, I think, 800 guns stolen only out of unlocked vehicles every year. Wow. So that is a huge problem, and we really just need to make sure that people are locking them up, being safe and responsible with their firearms, and I think that will go a long way to help mitigate some of that.
Yeah, and just on the topic of firearms, too, would you be in favor of a ban on assault rifles? I ask the hard questions sometimes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Personally, I don't know that anyone needs an assault rifle. I know that there are people who are very passionate about owning them. That would be something that I would want to confer with my colleagues on. It is a hard question, because I do not want to step into the territory of infringing rights. What I do want to do is problem solve. And I think that, at least on a state level, an assault weapons ban might be counterproductive to push for at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Moving along then, you also mentioned like criminal justice reform.
Yes.
You know, I think Colorado Springs, we've seen our fair share of, you could say problematic, definitely traumatic experiences that we've had, especially minority communities in the area have had with law enforcement. And there's no doubt that there is a systemic racism that exists within the current criminal justice system. So what are your thoughts on that, specifically looking at like our local community?
So what I would want to do is I would want to try and funnel basically all nonviolent crime into restorative justice, and even some violent crime as well, because I think that restorative justice is a solution rather than a Band-Aid. So the way we have it now is, you know, someone commits a crime, we say we don't like what you did, go away for several years. And while you're away, we're going to pay for your food, you're probably inadequate medical care, you know, you're going to get assaulted in there probably, you're going to be cut off from everyone you know and love. And what is that really doing to that person? Is that rehabilitating them? Is that giving them the mental health help they probably need? No. So that's not a good solution to the problem of crime.
Yeah.
So, but restorative justice programs, they will, you know, sit the perpetrator down with the victim, and that is healing for both parties. That is healing for the person who committed the crime as well as the victim. They both get to speak their mind, and it's more of a human confrontation rather than just reporting it to the police who hand it over to a judge who had nothing to do with it and just sees it on his desk for 5 minutes and makes a snap decision about what should be done, or has very little discretion to make a decision and just says, this is what the law prescribes and this is what I have to do.
So is it more of like, it sounds like it's kind of like an arbitration process then?
Yeah, similar to that, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, what, in some cases I'm sure there's going to be like victims who don't necessarily want to have those discussions. How does that, like...
Well, I would make it voluntary. Certainly, I wouldn't want to re-victimize them.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that maybe more people would want to have that confrontation than they might think.
Yeah.
I was hiking at Garden of the Gods in December, shortly before Christmas, and somebody smashed my car window out and took my purse. And if I had the opportunity to confront that person and tell them, you know, how that affected me, because there was $2 in my wallet, and they were not allowed to use my card because I canceled it as soon as I saw. So for their $2 that they got, I had to replace a car window. I have to replace a key fob that was in my purse. I had to replace my driver's license in like a week and a half before I had to fly for Christmas. I mean, it was just such a huge inconvenience for me, and they didn't get anything out of it.
Yeah.
You know, and I just want them to know that. And I would like to be able to tell them, you know, that hurt me and that cost me a lot of trouble and money. And I would have rather you not did that.
Yeah, and I think too, there's probably a good amount of people who would rather, like, you know, people commit petty crimes and disproportionately, you know, minorities go to jail for a longer period of time for, you know, those sort of, you know, maybe gross misdemeanors, not even felony offenses. I'm sure there's be a lot of people who'd rather have that conversation than see someone go to jail for something that was done to them.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And even, you know, we could set up some kind of program where they could work and pay restitution, you know, through like a community service type of thing. And that way I could get my key fob paid for in my new window. That would be nice too, because that would solve the whole problem, you know, as opposed to me reporting the police who didn't even find the people, you know.
Yeah, and so, I mean, there's another topic, too, about, like, you know, mandatory minimum sentences.
Yes, I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, yeah, like, and also then you're not in favor of that. That's good, because I think that's something hopefully a lot of people agree with. But there's a topic going on about the elimination of cash bail.
Yes, I think that is a good idea, because I think that the system is very much set up to favor those who have the money to navigate it. Yeah. So if you are arrested and you have the money to pay your bail, you can get out that day. Yeah. If you don't have the money to pay your bail, you sit in jail until you have your court date. Yeah. And then after that, if you bail out with that money that you have, you can get a lawyer. You know, you can confer with friends and family. You can get support while you're on the outside of jail, while the person who didn't have enough money for bail can't get anybody to answer their phone call. Yeah. And has to go with, you know, just public representation. So I do think that we need some equity in the justice system as far as the money that it takes to navigate through it as well. But if we were to switch to more of a restorative justice, then I think it might be less of an issue, because I think that it would be, like you said, the criminal would rather have a restorative justice path than 3 to 5 years in jail path.
Yep.
And so if they are guilty of the crime, I think that they would be more likely to say, I did it, I'm guilty, I'm sorry, what can I do to fix it? As opposed to, just saying, oh, I'm innocent, I want to get my sentence reduced as much as possible, and, making a deal, or perhaps even pleading guilty to something they're not guilty of, just to try and come out better in the end.
Yeah, take like a plea agreement or something. So, lastly, too, what's your stance on private prisons?
I don't like them, and I want to continue the efforts to get them out. There is a House bill that's up right now to start cutting back on private prisons and to end all contracts with them by 2024, and I fully support that.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't ever understand why that it seems inhumane to profit off of that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is inhumane, and it's basically, if these companies, these private prison companies are saying we need X amount of prisoners, what is that except for profiting off of human bodies being, contained and cut off from the rest of society? That's not moral. Yeah,
I agree too. And then lastly too, then the court system that we have. I mean, I think that there's things that can be addressed too, in the ways that people, different, again, minorities are given different sentences. Mm-hmm. So beyond like restorative justice, what do you think can be done to address, the systemic racism that exists within our court system? And I'm thinking specifically to the local Colorado, state system.
Well, that is a tough question, because really I think that boils down to what we do have in place as far as minimum sentencing. And I would just say that restorative justice, if we were to transition to more of a restorative justice, that would no longer be an issue.
Just because there would be less need of judges?
Well, not just that, but there would be less prescription. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you commit a crime, there's a very specific sentence for that crime. And you can either go to the low end or you can go to the high end. And the judges sometimes have that discretion. But if you were to have a restorative justice path, it would be more on a case-by-case basis, rather than, if you say, you stole $100 from this person and you stole $400 from this person, that's counted the same crime, right? Theft under $500.
Yeah.
But if you were to have a restorative justice path, you could say, you stole $100 from this person, so you have to work off $100. You stole $400 from this person, you have to work off $400. So it would make it more able to be tailored to each individual case, rather than just say, here you go, judge, this is what you can and can't do.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I've never heard of, or I mean, has that kind of method been adopted at a larger scale? Like, have other countries or have other states tried to kind of develop that sort of program?
I think it's kind of a newer idea. Yeah. So I would have to look and see where it has already been implemented. I know that we currently do have some kind of restorative justice type program being started here. So I would probably start there with talking to that group and see where they're at in Colorado Springs, exactly their starting point. And then, in their experience that they've had so far, what do they think needs to change or get better? And so I would confer with the people who have already been working on that in the state.
Yeah, I just never heard that concept before. It seems like there's a lot of ways I think it could, it would apply and make it actually highly beneficial. I think just personally, someone stole my bike. It's again, kind of the same thing. I want to talk to that person. I don't really care. I don't want them to go to jail for that.
Exactly. And I think that's how most Americans feel. It's not, I will say there are some who will say, lock them away forever and throw away the key. But I think for the majority, we know that we're all living in this country together. We all want what's best for all of us. And I think a big part of that is being able to have openness and honesty and human connection. And the justice system doesn't offer any of that.
Yeah, I just think too, having a crime on your record just puts you at such a disadvantage for so many things that are so vital.
That's true.
In this country, so.
Yeah, and that would help steer away from that as well.
Yeah.
That I would want there to be some kind of agreement that if they completed the restorative justice path, that they would not have to have a mark permanently on their record, because I don't think that does anybody any good. And it definitely leads to recidivism in the system that we have set up now.
Yeah. And I think one of the last topics you brought up was then affordable housing in this area. And that's something I can definitely attest to, just going through the process of just seeing how much my rent's increased over the last year, a couple of years. And I think you can see it too, like just in homelessness growth. Like there's a lot of factors that are contributing to homeless growth, but affordable housing is not doing anyone any favors, right? Like just not having an access to the ability to, find a place to live unless you make, a pretty good salary is, definitely going to be attributing to a lot of people sleeping out in the streets. So
yeah,
at the local, like, again, from Colorado Springs, at the local level, what in your view can be done to help solve that crisis?
That one I do have a very good answer for. So there's a housing first concept, and it has been implemented in several cities already. One of them is Salt Lake City, Utah, and they actually stopped. And after they stopped, they saw how good it was that they were doing it in the first place. And so the concept of a housing first program is that you do housing first, no barriers. So you don't say you can only sleep here from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then you have to leave. You don't say you have to be sober, you can't have alcohol. You don't say you can't bring your dog. Because those are the things that keep people on the street. They're not going to recover from alcoholism overnight. They're not going to recover from mental illness overnight. They're not going to get rid of their dog. So what you do is you remove all of those barriers and you give housing first. I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but physical safety and basically, survival needs come first. And when people don't have that basic building block met, that's when you start seeing, crumbling and problems and inability to, bring it back together because they don't have that very important foundational block of just having their physical needs met. And then I would also tie some mental health facilities into that so that they can get, whatever mental health help they need. Maybe have, a garden on the premises, things to build these people up instead of say, scream, get a job at them or give them tickets and send them to jail, which we pay for anyway. Let's be more smart with where we're spending our money. Let's help the homeless and not prosecute them. Yeah.
So how does, where would that, kind of development take place? Would that happen in a bunch of little parts of affordable housing or what do they call it, low income apartment units?
Yeah,
or is it think, more of a development?
I think I would probably start with an apartment building and then maybe have several staff members that would be on premises to kind of help monitor the situation, provide services like mental health help, helping them find jobs, just general, assistance, so that they're not just on their own completely oh, here's an apartment, here you go, good luck, to kind of help them navigate their way back into society and back into being self-sufficient.
Yeah, especially if you have a good support structure for them, like community service members and things that can help them find a job or, get them involved in the community. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty beneficial idea. I think how would that address would there be a price associated with the people would have to pay, or would it just be part of the social welfare network? Yeah,
so I would say that it would be a reallocation of the money that we already pay. So we already pay for various cleanup services, sending officers out to ticket. We pay for incarceration a lot of the time. So instead of paying for those things, then we would pay for housing instead.
Interesting.
And I think that the cost would actually be pretty comparative because jail is expensive. And not only that, but if we could get Fountain Creek cleaned up and people could go down there and fish, and we would have, it would be better tourism draw, to have that bike path, nice and scenic instead of seeing all the unfortunates, homeless people. It's sad, and you feel bad and you want to do something, so let's do something.
Yeah. And so, is there any metrics? Because you said it helped improve, or you saw improvement in Salt Lake City.
Yes. So they did say that it was a very successful program. I would have to delve more into the specifics if I were crafting legislation. But I do have the surface knowledge that it was successful. And I think Columbus, Ohio, is another city that had a successful program. There is one in Austin, Texas. I think it's called Loaves and Fishes or something like that, and it's a mobile home community, and that's where I learned about the garden. They have a garden and they're very hands-on and have the people put your hands in the earth and you grow something, and that helps the human brain and spirit grow as well. So.
A few other just topics on the topic of housing. So are you in favor of like rent control?
If that becomes necessary, then yes. I think that what I would ultimately like to see is for it to even out. But if that does not happen, then yeah, I would want to do something because the prices are just going to go up and up and up to where people are priced out of the city. And I've been seeing, you know, on Facebook, people who have lived here 10, 20 years saying it's getting too expensive for me, I have to leave. Yeah. And that doesn't build a strong community. Yeah. So it's not just an economic issue, it's a community issue. And I want the people who have lived in the Springs for years, who grew up in the Springs, I want them to be able to stay in the Springs. So I would do whatever it takes to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's plenty of investment firms like coming in, buying up houses, trying to flip them, making a few renovations, selling them or renting them at like double the price. I know like one story of a guy lived in his complex for 11 years and was being basically force evicted just so they can renovate it and double the rent. Yeah. I mean, like things like that. I hear that, and I agree. It's like you're not going to be able to build up like a local community, or you're going to be forcing people to go live somewhere else, and that's not really. Again, you don't necessarily want to have like a gentrification occurring, and unfortunately, that's what I see in the Springs, just like it's happening, you know, in Denver and other metros around the country. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think again, just having the ability to offer more affordable housing is pretty crucial. So
I agree.
There's a few other topics. Environment. You mentioned, I think, in your intro as well, environmental justice.
Yeah. Well, I'm coming at it from a standpoint of environmental health, because just like we have our health, the planet has its health, right? Yeah. So we don't want to be doing things that are harming the planet. We want to do things that will help the planet recover from what we've already done. So I would be very much in favor of, you know, tax incentives and things like that for companies to be carbon neutral or even carbon negative. That would be great. Yeah. And also, I'm a big proponent of solar power, because the sun has the power to power the planet already. Sure. And so we need to find effective ways to harness that and use it so that we're not digging up fossil fuels and, you know, doing all of that.
What's your opinion of the local Drake coal plant? Are you in favor of shutting it down?
Yes. And I that is not one of the issues that I have heavily researched, so I will go ahead and be honest that I don't know a lot of answers there. But I have heard from, you know, Colorado Springs residents that is a concern of theirs, that they want that shut down. So that is definitely something that I would be looking into and in favor of, because, you know, I have my own ideas, but ultimately, if I'm elected, when I am elected, it will be my job to represent the people.
For sure.
I listen, and I will repeat in the State House what I hear.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, it's getting to the point where keeping that plant open is actually more expensive than. You mentioned solar, like opening a solar farm, it's a lot of upfront cost, but the overall cost is actually a lot lower, because you basically generate plenty of electricity, and you can actually sell that to other states and other countries.
Yeah, and see, that's what I'm all about. I'm not about spending. I'm about investing, spending smarter. So I would like to keep spending the same or less, but if it has to be more and there's going to be a definite return of that investment, then I am all for that, because, you know, none of us are on this planet for the next 6 months, the next year. We're here for the rest of our lives. Yeah. You know, so we need to think in that long-term goal when it comes to spending and investing public money. And
there's also an investment that can be made to make sure that, you know, there's less forest fires.
Oh yes, wildfire mitigation is very important in Colorado.
Yeah, so like when people think about climate change, I think a lot of times they just focus on like, well, it's going to cost so much, but it's like there's always the cost of inaction, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, at a certain point, if we don't do something, money is going to become irrelevant. Yeah. And you know, we are quickly approaching that day, and so instead of waiting for that day, I would rather, you know, tackle the issue now. And yes, it is going to change things. It will probably cost money up front, but it's something that needs to be done. You know, like in a household budget, let's say you have a leaky roof and you need to fix it. Yeah. You can put it off and put it off and put it off, but one day that roof is going to cave in. And when that happens, you're going to wish that 2 years ago, when the hole was a lot smaller, that you had just called the roofers over and got it taken care of.
Yeah. Another topic that's been raised a lot is, you know, public transportation in Colorado. I think that there's not as much as there definitely could be.
I agree.
I mean, personally, I'm in favor of a rail system between in the Front Range between like Colorado Springs or even Pueblo to Fort Collins.
Yeah, we agree on that.
Yeah, and do you feel that there should be? You feel like there should be more investment?
Yes, definitely. Because again, that's an investment with a return. Because what we have now, we have a lot of accidents. You know, we have a lot of emissions from vehicles, and I think that if people had the option of public transport, a lot of them would choose that option. And so we could cut down on the emissions. We could cut down on, you know, even roadways possibly at a certain point. And definitely, you know, it's safer to have rail travel than 25. I mean,
or 25 itself is.
Yeah, and since they started the GAP project even, I mean, it's just gotten worse. So, I think that better public transportation all around is a great thing, and it will help people get jobs who don't have transportation. You know, how are you going to get a job if you don't have a car and the bus line doesn't go to your house or to your work or both?
Exactly, yeah. And I think too, like, there's been plenty of examples of cities who adopted a public transit system. And I think every example that I've seen has shown a growth in business on the areas specifically around it, or very close, maybe 1 or 2 miles away from the track, just because it does, like you said, brings in so many more people and it brings in so much more development. So yeah, again, I agree. It's not, there's a investment cost for sure, but you'll see returns relative pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, so. Exactly. And that's why I like to talk in terms of investing rather than spending. Yeah. Because it's like if you, if you go out and buy a car, then you're spending, right? And the car is a little bit of an investment, but it's going to depreciate. Yep. If you put that same amount of money into a company or the stock market, then, 10 years down the line, you're going to have more money because you invested it instead of just spending it. So I think a lot of what we do in government is spending instead of investing, and I would like to change that.
Okay, a few more topics real quick. I don't think they were mentioned, but they're hot items, so I got to bring them up.
Let's go for it.
Healthcare.
Yes.
Obviously, there's a debate, I think, within the Democratic Party between Medicare for all system, Medicare for all who want it, private versus public option. I guess those are both the same. Well, not really.
Well, it can get complicated because there are several different kinds of systems for healthcare, and some are single payer and some are not. Yeah. One thing that I heard was very interesting is that Britain has a single payer system, and so the government has the ability to negotiate drug prices because they can decline the drugs. They can say, nope, we won't sell that drug at all until you give us a price that we're willing to pay. That is honestly not something that I want for the United States, because I think that people should be able to have that drug availability if they want or need it. Like, my husband has epilepsy and he takes Depakote, and it has to be brand name Depakote because it regulates his brain chemicals. And so I don't know if you know about the FDA approval process. If you're going for a generic, you basically just have to make sure that it's close enough. And when it comes to brain chemicals and stopping grand mal seizures, close enough is not good enough. Yeah. And so I would not want to transition to a system where my husband cannot get brand name Depakote. And there are other drugs that would be needed, especially, the newer ones that are coming off of the markets. I mean, if people have the money and they want them, I think they should have access to them. So my main problem with single payer only is that it limits access to everyone. And that is a very strong bargaining chip, but you're bargaining with people's lives. So in Britain, there was a new cystic fibrosis drug that was available, and it was very effective. And I think it was several years before the government was able to successfully negotiate a price for this drug that they were willing to pay. I think it was 4 years. I would have to go back and look. But for those 4 years, people were dying of cystic fibrosis who could have had access to that drug, or people were going out of the country to get that drug. And I don't think that that's worth the bargaining power.
Yeah, I think there's the system that Britain has is definitely a lot more, I mean, people use the word socialist, but it is truly like a lot more of a socialist type system in the sense that the government does have a lot more control. Like comparing that system to a system like I don't believe you can, or the system in Denmark or Canada can have that same sort of like ability to necessarily control how people have access to drugs.
Yeah.
So I think but I ultimately agreed in the sense that you don't want to necessarily limit people's access, but at the same time you don't want to limit people's access by not having them be able to afford it at all, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it will be a complicated process to navigate, and I think that's why a lot of people are shying away from it, because it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
It just is. But it's something that needs to be done. And I think that a big deal for Americans is freedom and freedom of choice. And I think that we would absolutely have to have a private option available, because just point blank, Americans don't want to give up their freedom, and they don't want to give up their choice for health care. And so if there was a system that would include everyone, but still provide choice and freedom, that is the ideal that we should work for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just agree to disagree in a sense, because I feel like a lot of that is driven more by not knowing. A lot of people, the choice that they want is a choice of doctor. Who they get their insurance from, they don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, because like at the point is they want to use the same doctor and have access to the health care that they need to survive. Where like if it's Blue Cross or Cigna, like I mean, most people don't really know, because their employers change that pretty frequently from year to year anyway. But yeah, I mean, I guess we can just agree to disagree in a sense, because I do think that, like, you know, the path forward is a Medicare for all system, because it just basically eliminates people's, you know, the barriers people have to face to get access. But.
Well, I would be in favor of a Medicare for all system if the government would not, you know, deny drugs as a bargaining tool.
Yeah.
So if that were specifically written into, we will not limit access to, you know, new pharmaceuticals and treatments, then I would support a Medicare for all.
Yeah, I have to look more into that, because I don't think, I have to look into because I don't remember that being an issue for, I know that the system that they use in the UK is a lot more, there's a lot more like administrative sort of stuff like that. I believe like a Medicare for all system primarily looks at if it's FDA approved. And again, if there's like a generic alternative versus another, I don't think they necessarily like say, oh, you have to use the generic because it's cheaper. Because I agree, like there are differences in certain generics. Like the active ingredients might be the same, but if you look at like, if you do like the, you know, chemical analysis of the drug, there are, you know, minor little things that do affect people. So
exactly.
Yeah, so I agree with that.
Okay, I don't think we disagree that much. But
no,
I definitely just want people to still have the choice, and I want them to have the availability of all of the cutting edge, you know, treatments and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and I think that's the way that the Denmark system, Canadian system is set up.
So. And now, are those single payer systems, or do they have private options as well?
They do not have private options. No, basically the way that the way that those systems primarily work is just you get a card that says you're, you know, a citizen basically, and you go to the doctor, and it's all covered. Now there are certain things that aren't covered if it's like if it's like I don't know, honestly, just like Western medicine. What's the word for it?
Like homeopathic?
Yeah, like homeopathic medicines. Like, again, basically, if it's not like FDA approved, then there might be some, you know, supplemental plans that public or private insurance companies might be able to support. But overall, like if it's something that's certified and there's enough analysis of it, then it's covered. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, that sounds good to me. As long as we're not limiting choice and freedom, then I think that would work.
Yeah. And then like a college for all type system, or like a system that allows people to go to college for free.
I would love that, honestly. I think that, again, it's an investment. If people have the drive and the will to further their education, then we as a society should be doing everything we can to help them with that. You know, an educated populace is a good thing. You know, having more professionals is a good thing. Education, as I said earlier, you know, it lowers the likelihood of crime, drug addiction. Like, basically, a more educated citizenry is a happier and healthier citizenry. And so I absolutely support, you know, funding higher education for people who want to take that path. I think that money should not be a barrier to being a professional.
Yeah, and I mean, investment is definitely, like, we've been saying investment a lot, but I mean, without a doubt, if people have access to a college education, they can earn more, they can spend more in the economy, they can put more into the economy, they can get houses, they can get all the things that we've talked about. they basically have those doors open for them.
Yeah, and we have a lot less people who are stuck on the outside of the system needing services for being homeless or needing food stamps, and even mental health care. Having a good and productive job can make people happier.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I mean, it's so multifaceted.
And like trade schools as well. Like trade schools are one of those things that people still need to pay for. Those costs are increasing. And the other aspect I always think about too are like the not as high earning jobs that are still vital. Such as like art, humanities, jobs that a lot of people want to go get into, but they're just afraid of the debt that they accrued to do it.
Yes, yeah, and the student loan interest is ridiculous and unnecessary. Like, why do we have to make money off of students when they are trying to be an investment themselves?
Yeah. Okay. And last thing, because it was brought up, and I don't typically mention this a lot, but I probably should start adding it to my repertoire. But money in politics, right now, like there's a lot of money that's being put into like lobbying and being put into corporate super PACs and things like that. How is your campaign being funded? Are you taking oil and gas money?
No, I am not, actually. It is being funded currently by friends and family mostly. And then, I have some supporters in the city and online who are giving. It's mostly, smaller grassroots donations. So I'm definitely not funded by any of the big guys. But I think that, lobbying in and of itself is not problematic all the time, because I do know that there are lobbyists for, like, say, the teachers union. They go and they talk to legislators. So they can be a communication conduit, but they can also be, to try to get more profit for a business or to try and get favorable laws passed for large corporations. And so I would say that there needs to be maybe a watchdog agency on that. And as far as campaign financing, the way that we campaign can change. I think that, this is the digital age. We can reach far more people through social media and just media in general than in the past. And not everybody wants to have somebody going around their neighborhood knocking on doors saying, hi, how do you feel about this? And who are you going to vote for? That kind of thing. And we also don't need to be charging politicians huge amounts of money to run ads. I think that maybe we could come to some kind of agreement where you're limited to what ads you can run, or where things are publicly funded for a campaign, so that it doesn't just become more about raising money than about legislative ideas.
Yeah, and I think there's been ideas too about like basically giving every citizen like a certain amount of money that they can put specifically into certain campaigns, like they call them like freedom dollars or something, something like that. Of course they do. It's like marketing, but the idea is like basically like you get $100 and you can invest that $100. Like the government gives you $100 that you can only use to invest in like candidates, like campaigns. What's your thoughts on something like that?
Well, it's the first time I'm hearing of it. So, I think that we do need to have some kind of a system that makes it more equitable as far as who is running, because if someone is running and they have a lot of wealthy friends and family, they are going to probably win. Whereas somebody who comes from, a lower socioeconomic background who probably has a lot of good ideas might not be as well funded.
I think it seems like, from a socioeconomic perspective as well, like there's probably a certain level of diversity that we see in local politics that's definitely being benefited from that, right?
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
So I would say that we need to find a way, no matter what that is, whether it's freedom dollars or limitations on television ads, whatever, we need to find a way to make the election process more equitable so that the people with the good ideas, with the drive to better society, are the ones being elected rather than the ones with the most money and the richest friends.
Awesome. Yeah. Last thing then, as I promise, this is actually last thing. I think I said that several times already. But
That's okay.
How do we vote for you? Like, what's your like current path right now? There's a primary coming up, I think June 30th. Is that?
Yes. So I am going to be in a primary. If you are a delegate, whoever is watching this, please go to the county convention and stand up for me. And then once I reach the delegate threshold, there will be a primary in June. And then I will be running against Terry Carper, who is the Republican incumbent for House District 20.
Okay. Yeah. And can you just quickly explain some of the key differences between you and the current occupant?
Well, yes. So she actually does some work that I approve of. She did some good things for like human trafficking and cracking down on child pornography, which I support 100%. So if and when elected, I would continue those efforts. But she also doesn't believe in a woman's right to choose her own reproductive rights. I disagree heartily there. It's a very complicated biological process to have a baby. I've had two, and the maternal mortality rate, especially in this country, is so high. I can't see how anybody would advocate for forcing women to have children that they don't want. And so that's one key difference. And then also she voted down a mental health bill that would have helped children because it was, to provide direct mental health services to a child, without maybe having to involve the parents. So it's not that the parents couldn't be involved. It's that if the child wants to seek mental health help, that would have opened the doors for them to be able to do that if their parents weren't on board. Because some parents would say, I'm not taking you to see a therapist or a counselor or, something like that. And so I think we need to be, opening doors to mental health help and not closing off access. Mental health is not something that needs to be stigmatized. Mental health care is not a bad thing. I have been to therapy. My husband, as I mentioned, has seizures, and when you find your spouse bloody and on the floor, that's traumatic, and you need mental health care. And that's not something that any of us should be ashamed to admit. That is something that is healing to admit. You go take care of it. You talk to somebody about it until you feel better about it.
I mean, I think that there's this, I don't even know the statistic anymore, but it's a growing number of people who are seeking mental health. And I think that's like it is in this day and age for sure going to be something that's going to be more and more useful, I think, for dealing with our problems. And like you said too, I think just talking things out that you're going through with someone is vital. I think is highly important. And on that topic of I understand there's going to be certain things that parents might not want their kids to be a part of, but it should be the child's choice, right? In that sense. Yeah,
exactly. Especially, when you get into the teenage years. So say that, there's a girl who has a boyfriend and they've started having a sexual relationship, and say he does something that she doesn't like during that time, but her parents don't even know she's sexually active. She should be able to go and talk to somebody about these issues without having to involve her parents. And I'm not saying that, teenagers should be lying to their parents, but I'm saying that if they're not going to be open with their parents, that they should have access to someone else who they can be open with, who can help guide them from an adult perspective.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. So, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say or mention before?
I think we covered everything I had, and then some.
Go into a lot of topics here. So, again, thanks for your
I'm ready for it.